Okay, so hello again, Internet. Welcome back to another episode of MEET la PRENSA. We have our friend of show, our first ever friend of show, Rafael Bernal, returning tonight. And we have some interesting questions to ask him about what's been going on this week, especially at DHS. DHS had this very high-profile briefing that included President Biden, and from the looks of it, several sort of regional leads from the National Security Council. Rafael, can you tell us a little bit about what was said, what goes on, or what was said, and what's changing and what's staying the same in the Biden immigration policy now that Mayorkas has had a little bit of time to, dive into the deep end of the situation he's inheriting?
So I think the key player here is Mayorkas. He's the first DHS secretary in the department's history who's an immigration expert. He does have a similar profile to previous secretaries. He was a prosecutor at some point, but he's the architect of DACA, for instance. So he knows immigration policy inside and out. That has never been the case for this department. That's really become the Department of Immigration because it was supposed to be the anti-terrorism department with an immigration component. It's kind of flipped that on its head. So what the Biden administration is signaling here is sort of, if it's going to be the immigration department, we're going to do immigration right. Like, we're going to know what we're doing on immigration, and our policy is going to follow the social science. And in the critical moment when Mayorkas was at the White House briefing this week was when a reporter pushed him on whether it is a crisis that the surge of unaccompanied minors at the border. And she's basically asking him how he cannot call it a crisis when Jay Johnson, Obama's DHS secretary, his last DHS secretary, called 1,000 kids a crisis. And this is 10,000 kids, or projected up to 13,000. And he said, very simply, this is a challenge, not a crisis. It might be semantics, but it is a very different approach.
So Stephen Miller obviously expanded, and I think most people would agree, it surpassed the limits of executive authority as Trump's immigrations are. If Secretary Mayorkas is to be Biden's immigrations are, how much of what Stephen Miller has created or did during those 4 years is he going to be able to kind of like undo? Obviously, nothing that Stephen Miller did went through Congress. Nothing was actually codified into law. So how easy is it going to be to unravel the 4 years of Trump immigration policy, and so that the Biden administration can proactively enact their own immigration agenda, either on top of it or in lieu of it, or however it works?
Well, that's the knot that the Biden folks are trying to untangle right now. The quick answer is nobody knows, but the reality is the president has immense powers on immigration, just huge powers granted to him by Congress on immigration. There's not even like a real judiciary component to immigration that goes through the executive as well. So it's just like all three branches on this one issue are put into one person. And Stephen Miller, to great effect, pushed forward his policies, knowing that going through Congress was basically impossible on this issue. Now, Biden is trying to go through Congress, but they're also trying to see like how much can they untangle, how much can they fix, and whether it's good to keep this system where each successive president basically does whatever he wants on immigration. And that's, of course, one of the big criticisms of the Obama-Biden administration was having those powers. They weren't exactly used in a very progressive manner or a very pro-immigrant manner. Two separate things, really. This administration apparently is going to be very pro-immigrant, very pro-immigration. So, well, it really remains to be seen, but it is exciting to see a different approach for the first time in DHS's history.
I think it's really interesting that you bring up the distinction between the progressive approach and the pro-immigrant approach in like sort of the American political discussion right now. Who do you think wins? I think that what you mean by that is sort of like the progressive approach being more relief for immigrant communities, and the moderate one being more considerations about what the numbers are in terms of votes on Capitol Hill and so on, and then the calculus surrounding the midterm. Who wins that discussion moving toward over the next 4 years?
Well, so what I mean by that is immigration is not a right-left issue. It has become a right-left issue. It became that under Trump. The right basically took on the restrictionist movement. It's part of its core values, and now they seem inextricable. I do think it would be very hard for sort of the right wing of the Republican Party to abandon that positioning at this point, but progressives weren't always very pro-immigrant. So it's really the strange thing about immigration is if it's ever resolved, like the real crisis in immigration is that it's poorly managed. It's a social phenomenon that happens all over the world and has happened for all of human history, will probably keep happening. And countries succeed or fail with immigration depending on how they manage this phenomenon, the movement of people. And of course, the United States has failed to manage the movement of people in this hemisphere, especially in this hemisphere, for the last 30 years. Maybe this approach will make them succeed, maybe not, but the restrictionist approach that has been incrementing over the last 30 years and culminating in the Trump presidency clearly did not make U.S. immigration policy great.
Again. Right. So the restrictionist approach of the America First movement that sort of defined the Trump presidency on the immigration policy portfolio in the White House obviously had a whole new look by including the National Security Council in the White House briefing this week. Who are some of the key players beyond Secretary Mayorkas, who your learned eye might have seen at the table, or just sort of who have risen to replace some of these old Stephen Miller cronies that we should be keeping an eye on moving forward? Like who are the players to watch, if you will, on the White House immigration portfolio in the Biden presidency?
Well, one person I find very interesting who's in there is Ashley Tabador. She used to be the head of the Immigration Judges Union, and remember they're with the Department of Justice. They're like regular federal employees, but she was the head of the union, butted heads with the Trump administration. She is now head counsel for USCIS, the DHS component that gives out visas and naturalizations and green cards. So it's very interesting that she made it there. But the reality is Mayorkas' team on immigration isn't complete yet. You still don't have a Senate confirmed USCIS head. You don't have a new ICE and CBP, and all these components. He's still missing his team in great measure. There's of course a lot of work. You have like people in the White House, Sainz, Cristobal Alex, Pili Tobar, people who understand the pro-immigrant conversation, especially within the Hispanic community. And there's of course a lot of interaction with Congress, a lot more interaction with Congress and with immigration, with pro-immigrant members of Congress with the White House. But the team is not yet fully defined. And that's something that they need to hurry up, because the Trump administration very quickly installed a team that understood the inner workings of DHS really well.
And who are the key players, who are the key allies that the administration is going to need on Capitol Hill to enact any agenda, that whether it's progressive or pro-immigrant, however it falls on the spectrum, moving something forward that perhaps can be codified, or even moving things forward that codified into law through the legislative process, or perhaps moving things forward that can be enacted through executive authority? Who are the cheerleaders and who are the power brokers on Capitol Hill who the administration really needs to step up right now?
So like everything with this administration and this Congress, they're going to see a very different picture in the House and the Senate. In the House, their key allies, Pramila Jayapal, the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, she is an immigrant activist. She is an immigrant. She is going to be a core ally and somebody that the Biden administration will be able to rely on to, if she gets what she wants on immigration, she can lead progressives to the more moderate approach on other issues that the Biden administration is proposing, because let's face it, there will always be a quid pro quo. Then, of course, the Tri-Caucus, Quad Caucus, that's the Hispanic Caucus, Black Caucus, Asian Pacific American Caucus, and the Native American Caucus. They sort of band together, and they're either called the Tri or Quad Caucus. they're going to be crucial because they're the most affected by immigration policy. Their constituencies are the most affected by immigration policy, and they've been pushing it. And then there's a small group of Republicans, a small group of Republicans, some of them very conservative, some of them very moderate, but who've been pushing to modernize, for example, the agricultural workforce. There is a bill called that was a bipartisan bill passed in last year's House. It might be passed in this year's House as well. And then in the Senate, they don't have a path to 10 Republican senators on any Democratic priority, whether it's immigration, whether it's COVID relief. So they're either going to have to find that path, and Biden working some Senate magic that nobody's really figured out what it looks like, or they're going to have to change the Senate rules, or simply blame the Republicans for inaction and try to go into a midterm election. Best. Yeah, and that's never worked. Like a midterm election, blaming the other party for inaction has never really worked for an incumbent party. So I'm reluctant to think they would even consider that as an option.
Rafael, you've been sidelined from the beat by your immigration status and the failure of USCIS to renew your work visa. We've discussed this in our first episode, actually, of MEET la PRENSA, and we'll include the link to that interview here in the description to this video. But my question for you is, if you were on the beat, what's the story you would have written this week? Story or stories?
Oh, wow. So the first one with Puerto Rico, it's like the status question on Puerto Rico. There's so much politics moving behind that, moving behind HR 1. I can't write that story right now for my immigration, because my immigration situation, for starters, but also because it would have taken a lot of digging. There's a lot of movement there. And then on immigration, there's like this progressive, like longer range story of what does DHS look like under an immigration-minded secretary. I think that's the story this week, and it's going to be the story for the next 2 years, because it's just fascinating. And sort of on another one, I would have also the challenges that Javier Becerra is facing to become Secretary of Health and Human Services. That's, remember, also very important for the immigration component, because that's the ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, is under Health and Human Services. So Becerra is part of that immigration team. So, maybe that's a good pitch. Where is Biden's immigration team?
Got it. Last question. So, tragically, not on the beat. Others are. Did you read any reporting this week that really caught your eye?
Oh, I mean, Hamed Ali-Aziz keeps hitting it out of the park. Molly O'Toole at the LA Times. I think there's a lot of good reporting. It's a beat with very policy-minded reporters who are also really good writers, which usually never happens. So, Silvia Foster-Frau's first long-form story in the Washington Post. It's just too much good stuff to follow on this beat.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Rafael. Thanks for joining us again. Officially, first friend of the show, friend of MEET la PRENSA.
Hey, it's great to be here. Buddy.